Welcome to the second day of the first ever ONF Leadership Summit. I am told, reliably told, that yesterday was very interesting and not a little thought-provoking in terms of the content of what people presented, and hopefully people will leave the conference after the end of today and take some learning back. And what I find is that we don't tend to learn desperately well from each other. So if we can do some more of that, then I think that's very, very helpful. So, put that to one side. A bit of housekeeping before we start. Questions throughout the day. There's a roving mic in the room, or you can use the Slido app. So if you were all here yesterday, I'm presuming you know where the Slido app is, and you can put questions through there. The team are encouraging us to tweet and share photos on Twitter and social media using hashtag ONF Summit. Apparently we've got to have phones on silent though, and there are no planned fire alarms. Okay, so with all of that said, I'm hopeful that we can certainly get through to 10:45, and then there's a break, and then we can sort of have a drink and think to ourselves, how's that gone for the first hour and a half? And then we can negotiate the period up to lunchtime. So without further ado, delighted to introduce our first speaker of the day, who's Andrea McGee. She's the CFO and Deputy Chief Exec at Warrington and Halton Teaching Hospitals, and she's the Vice Chair of the National Finance Academy. Andrea's been leading the National Finance Academy's workstream for talent management development, and she's here to launch something very special today, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because she's going to launch it. So I'm going to welcome Andrea to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I am really happy to be here this morning, unlike Lee. I don't think I went to bed as late as Lee, so that might be why. But I am really excited to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction. So, why am I here? I'm here to launch today the Inclusive Talent Management Strategy for finance staff, every member of finance staff in England. So I think today is a really special day. And I was thinking in the car on the way here about when I first started in the NHS a lot of years ago, over 30 years ago, Goole. And I was a band 2, debtors clerk, and I got offered 2 jobs in 1 week. One in the NHS and one outside of the NHS. And there were 2 reasons that I chose the NHS job. The first was my grandma was a learning disability matron. So I'd spent quite a lot of time with her, with service users at summer camps, 3-legged races, welly throwing, that kind of thing. So I felt a connection to the NHS. And the second reason was because when I had my interview, I got told that if I wanted to train and develop, that I would be able to do that if I joined that organisation. And that was a real pull. So I took the decision. That was my sliding doors moment, I think. And since then, I've not looked back. And I've been very, very lucky. And when I think about all the opportunities that we have as finance people in the NHS, we should be very, very proud of what we do to help each other and learn and develop on behalf of our patients. So I think this really is an important day. When I look back, I was part of introducing appraisals into my organisation. So 30 years ago, we didn't do appraisals. That was something that was new. And now it's the norm. So I'm hoping it doesn't take 30 years for talent management to become the norm. We do get accused of being slow sometimes, but Anyway, I just wanted to give you some reflections that I'd had on the way. So I'll just get into it now. So what have we been doing for quite some time in order to get here to launch this today? So it all started with that very, very unique, widespread engagement conversation with our staff, and they told us resoundingly that they wanted to be considered, seen, included, no matter what grade, how they come into the NHS, what background. They wanted to be seen, and they wanted their talent to be nurtured, recognised, and they wanted that growth. So there's no point having a big conversation with all of our staff if we don't listen to them and don't respond. Part of the listening event was a reorganisation of how we manage and deliver staff development across England, and the National Finance Academy was established in September 2021, and that's under the leadership of Hardev Verdi. Hi, Hardev. I was asked to be the vice chair, and I thought that was a real honour and privilege. And I think Hardev's leadership has been absolutely vital in doing an awful lot of work that many people might not know about, that they've come out of that National Finance Academy. And we've linked that Finance Academy to regional academies or regional development boards to try and get some consistency throughout the whole of England. So in February 2022, I was asked, would you lead a work stream, a small group, to have a look at delivering a talent management strategy for the NHS finance community, which was a pretty big task, actually, if you're to be asked by Hardev ever so nicely. But we set up a group and been meeting routinely, trying to figure out how do we do this. And somebody on the group was talking about their experience of working outside of the NHS and what they did around talent. And we thought, we probably want to talk to other organisations and find out how they do it. Can we shamelessly pinch from other areas? We ended up getting engaged with KPMG, who offered to provide support for free because they were very interested in what we were doing. And that culminated in a workshop that there were around 50 delegates from across the whole country, all different backgrounds, all different bands, all different experiences. And we came together and we heard how other industries manage their talent. So we're going to hear from Mike on the panel next from Coca-Cola. So we heard what Coca-Cola do, which was very exciting. Unilever, HMRC, and we spent the day looking at what those organisations do, but also looking at what we do, because actually what we realised was we do a lot of that. In fact, we do an awful lot of that. We're quite good, really. We're not sure we're consistent across the whole of the NHS, but my God, there's a lot of stuff that we do and we do it really well. So I felt a sense of pride as well when we were in the room that day. And we basically came up with a vision that I'm going to come on to next, which surprised me a little bit, and I'll tell you why when we come on to it. So we, from that workshop, developed a strategy. We didn't want it to be War and Peace. We wanted it to be a couple of pages long, nothing too detailed, nothing complex. This should not be rocket science. We need to make sure this is simple and accessible. So we developed that. We presented it to the Leadership Council for feedback. We agreed to engage with the regional boards, and we expected regional directors to engage right across and get feedback from every part of the NHS. So thank you to all of those regional finance directors for taking this so seriously and for doing that for us. And we got invaluable feedback that really helped shape the strategy. And then we finally got the strategy signed off in May 2023 with a view that we would use this conference as an opportunity to do the launch. So here we are today, And if you go onto the One NHS Finance website, you will see all of the tools that have been developed to support this strategy. Okay, so this was a real surprise to me. When we were looking at what's the vision, it's a little bit longer than maybe we might have started out to want, but the bit that surprised me is the bit at the end, because these are hard-nosed accountants. And what they really felt that they liked the most out of everything that people came up with was the fact that no one gets left behind. And there was quite a moment in the room when that got presented by one of the groups, a real moment. And we felt actually that's what we think our staff were telling us that they wanted. They wanted to be seen no matter who they were and feel included. So also what's really important about this is equitably, this real sense of this being equal, seeing people realise their best potential no matter what that is. And really importantly, why bother doing that? To benefit the NHS. That benefits the people that we work with, the people we work for, the ops staff, the clinical staff that we support, and ultimately all of that benefits the patient. So we felt that, while a little long, captured everything, all the ingredients that we wanted to have and a strategy that we wanted to deliver. So, key points of the strategy is that it is inclusive. I'll keep saying that, but that really was the feedback. When people saw the draft strategy, they still weren't seeing enough about feeling included. There was a strong feeling it might be aimed at people that were studying and therefore not for them. So no matter who you are, whether you're new from a grad scheme, new from school, older and new, older and been there for 30, 40 years in an organisation, this relates to you. There's also a little bit of anxiety around line managers. What if your line manager doesn't do this, get this, do it very well? That already exists around appraisal. So as part of this, we started to think about, well, what do we need to do to go alongside this to really help deliver this properly for all of our staff? So we picked that up as something that we would need to seek to address. Some people like a model. What kind of models, tools could we provide in order to help people have conversations, be those conversations with individual members of staff, once, twice a year, about their aspirations, their talent, how we can provide support to people delivering and achieving their aspirations, or senior teams of people in organisations, in systems, looking at where are the gaps in our talent pipeline, where do we need to focus on real attention, do we have any problems if somebody leaves a position somewhere that there's nobody able to step in and keep that continuity. So what tools could we use? So we spoke to the Leadership Academy. They're working on a scope for growth model that will be applied to all staff in the NHS, but we just don't know when that's going to be ready. So we've had a look at that model, and it's very, very similar to a Coca-Cola model. So we want to make sure that we're in line with whatever might come out at some stage in the future. And we looked at the talent pipeline model that Coca-Cola use as well, which, no offence, Mike, it's not rocket science, is it? It's very, very straightforward, easy to use, and lots of people may already be doing this without even aligning it to a model. And it just really fits in very, very well with well-led. So when you're thinking about well-led in conversations around CQC, that's a really great model to have visible, whether you're a provider or an ICS or a region. I mentioned consistency with other departments in terms of if something comes in nationally, we won't be out of kilter with that. We're not going to go down one avenue and have to come all the way back and go down another with all of our staff. And we want to really kind of highlight what benefits this will bring to individuals and to the finance function as a whole. So we've got to think about how do we measure the impact on people. So looking at things like the staff survey, looking at succession planning, looking at recruitment and retention, and the impact that has on organisations. And I mentioned the toolkits. They're live on the website today for people to have a look at, and I would encourage you to do that. Okay, so here's a look at the toolkit that's out there. There's a number of different things. Over on the left, you've got the self-assessment toolkit. That can be used for appraisal. We'll support talent management conversations, so people now can log on, register, say what grade they are, what job they do, and have a look at what competencies you'd expect somebody to have in a role like that. And they can look at any role and see, actually, I quite like the look of that, how would I get to there? So that's a really helpful tool, all the way through to, if you're a line manager, support and advice on how to have a conversation with your staff. And if you're not a line manager, how to have a conversation with your line manager. So starting to get some real support, more to come, on how to start to have those really important conversations about aspirations. There's a bit on there about governance and about indicators of success as well, and there's more to be done in those areas, and I'll come on to that in terms of next steps. So here's just a bit of a very high level look at the model for those that like models. So we're looking at, this is really highlighting this applies to everybody. There are those people at the moment who will say, when you have a conversation, they're really happy doing what they're doing. They don't want to do anything different. Everything's hunky-dory, thank you very much, stop talking to me, I'm fine. But actually, if people don't grow, they will get behind and they will fall behind. So this is about making sure that even if you don't want to move and move on to anything else, you still need to grow, because nobody wants to go backwards. And when you look at the staff survey results for finance staff across the NHS, our lowest score is we are always learning. So when we're having this conversation, we're going to support our staff to make sure they're always learning, but they need to come to the table and do what they can to always be learning as well. So the model recognises those people that don't necessarily want to develop. Then it looks at those that want to stretch, who might want to study, who might want to learn, and the support that they may need. And then they've got the accelerate, the really ambitious people, seem super talented. How do you manage their expectations in a positive way? What support might you need from other organisations in order to help those people get to where they want to get to? And the strategy also recognises you can move around between those. So you might be quite happy at the moment, you've got things going on at home, you don't really want to do a great deal, but you've got to keep up to date. But in a couple of years' time, your circumstances may change, and you may move to stretch or accelerate, and vice versa. So it's quite simple, but that just helps frame a conversation. So CFOs. Oh dear, what do we need from the CFOs? Well, we need you. We need you to do this. We need to look back and see that talent management just became the norm, and it worked really well. And our staff were always learning, and our staff had really high morale, much better than everybody else that works in the NHS. And they'll all have to copy us, won't they? Because looking after people is really important, and we're going to be talking about our people. We've talked about AI and all the tools to help us do our jobs really efficiently. You need to look after the people. So we need you to look after your people, and in doing so, look after yourself, look after your organisation, and look after your patients. So do have a look at the document. I know we get loads of things in our inboxes, but we have made it very, very easy to read and quite short, I promise. Share this with your deputies, share this with your managers. Talk about your talent in your organisation unashamedly. Talk about your teams. Talk about everybody. Message this not just across your organisation, share, collaborate. When you're out and about, talk about talent there. Challenge one another. What are you doing? Are you having your talent conversations? Are they working? Do you need any help? Our trust boards should become aware of talent management if we tell them about it, but also as part of the Leadership Academy nationally, this is something that will be coming at a stage in the future. I don't know when, but you could talk to your boards about this now. Encourage your staff. Time and time again, we're too busy. You keep giving us too much work to do. Don't be too busy to look after your career, your development. Don't be too busy to do that. How do we build that into just the way we do things around here? How do we get that culture of looking after talent, speaking about talent openly, developing talent, and working together across organisations to make that happen? And then the Towards Excellence accreditation process, for those who haven't seen the staff survey results, there is a direct correlation between our staff morale and the level of accreditation. Direct, and it goes up by level. So no accreditation to level 1, to level 2, to level 3. At each level, our staff morale increases. So this kind of stuff does work. And we're looking to bring in, checking, are we doing our talent management? Is it working? Do our staff feel recognised as part of that Towards Excellence process? So we will be adapting the process to include this. Okay, we've got a plan. It would be great, wouldn't it, launch this today and then sail off into the sunset, but actually we do need a plan to make sure this delivers. So I won't go through all of the detail on here, but just to let you know, lots of comms and engagement in the next few months. The East of England have offered to work really closely with us to feed back how it's working for them, so we can look to amend how we're doing this as we go, rather than wait. We will want to make sure that you start to have those talent management conversations towards the back end of this financial year, if not sooner. We want to know that you're all doing that. And we want our regional directors to really step up to the plate here and make sure they're getting involved with this as well. You all know who you are. I will find you. And then going into next year, we'll be taking updates to our Finance Academy board meeting, making sure that everything's going as we would like it to. And we're going to be talking to all of your staff. We're going to ask them, how do they rate their finance directors? Is this happening in your organisation? If it is happening, what does it feel like? Is it working? Do we need to change it? And then we want to go back to the Leadership Council after just over a year's worth of implementation. Do a check-in there, let the council know how we've got on. And then we'll look, September 24, we'll probably do a refresh. We think that'll be about the right time to do a refresh and make sure we're really getting this right. And finally, we're going to have a look at, do we think it's making any difference? Because that's really important. If it's not making a difference, we're doing it wrong. And that is it. So consider the talent management strategy launched. Thank you.
Any questions? There are questions. Kim?
Thank you, Andrea. Kim Lee, a CFO from South Warwickshire University FT. Great to hear really about the launch of the strategy. Just wondered, the slides are too far away for me to read, so apologies if it's in the content. But you said about checking in after a couple of years around how we've done. But I just wondered, what are the key kind of KPIs or kind of success measures have you actually built in terms of targets, in terms of how you, what's the level of ambition in terms of what you're expecting to see as good outcomes, really?
Yeah, that is a really good question. It's one that we've been asked throughout the whole programme of setting this up. We don't have what I would say a full set of outcome criteria at this stage in a way, you know, systematic. What we're looking at is setting that up. That's a piece of work in train at the moment, but we expect that to include things like staff satisfaction and a staff survey. We were looking at recruitment and retention rates. We'll survey staff, we'll ask staff how this is working for them, so we'll do the engagement. So there are a number of things that we'll look to do. We're bringing this into the accreditation standards as well. But it's a really good point. We need, that's why in about 18 months we're looking to do an audit of where we've got to. But we're working on exactly what that level of ambition will be. But the overall ambition is that we start having these conversations very, very soon, and it starts to become the norm, the way we do things around here. So if it's not become the norm in any part of the country, we haven't done this very, very well. So it's not rocket science, as I said. It's basic, it's having conversations. Having those happen will be an initial positive outcome because they're happening, but what will be more important is then the impact of those. And like I say, things like staff survey, recruitment and retention are in there, but there may be more measures that we do come up with.
I mean, I sort of listened to what you said, and I was particularly struck with the bit about those people who don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
And your bit about, well, they've got to keep on growing as well. Because I've got a whole load of staff who sit there saying, I've been here 20 odd years and I'm quite happy where I am, thank you. So I thought that was quite helpful, and quite clearly there's what I think what you're trying to do here, and what I think is really helpful, is provide a framework within which each organisation can do what they're doing. And in my ignorance, I sort of sit there and think to myself, every organisation's doing it. But I work in two organisations, I can tell you, they're not all doing it to the same level. So I think people are at a different place.
Our staff told us that we're not doing it everywhere. And when we had the workshop with KPMG workshop, the experiences of the people in the room were very, very widely different, very different. So you only really get to know what it's like where you are, but actually some of our staff, you know, we're in a very different place to others. Okay.
Before we take any more questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite onto the stage Mike Clark, Vice President of Finance, Strategy and Transformation at Coca-Cola, and Donna Griffiths, who's the Chief People Officer at UHCW. They're also a Virginia Mason Institute Partnership representative. And between the three of them, we can ask them anything we want on this particular topic. And I've got some questions that I've been primed with. But if anybody's got any questions, Mr. Forster.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. That was great. Rob Forster, Liverpool University Hospitals. As we've got increasing challenges in finance, we hear a lot about the stress from our teams. Do you think that the talent management is a way in to also check in on well-being, and can we link the two things together, would be the first question. And how do we marry this up with some of the HR strategies that are going on that might be doing something slightly different? Do we run risk of confusing the organisation?
Okay, so thanks, Rob. I think having a conversation is always a good way in to check in on somebody's health and well-being, and people's situations can have a really big impact on how they're doing at work, how they're feeling about work, where their head's at? Are they having time to even think about their own career? Are they so wrapped up in other things? And that's an opportunity to recognise and signpost support and advice. And I think we've done a lot of work, there's been separate work streams looking at the offer around well-being of staff. So I think we do an awful lot of really good stuff on well-being, but actually having that personal conversation has got to be helpful, hasn't it? So, and you know, that's a good line manager having that conversation, isn't it? One of the things we have been really concerned about, that might be too strong a word, is doing something that then ends up being very out with what's happening across our organisation. So it's like, oh, you've got me to do this, and now we've got to go and do that, which is why we talked to the Leadership Academy about their plans to make sure we were consistent. We can wait and wait, can't you? And our staff, since that conversation, have waited a bit of time, haven't they, for us to do this? So we don't want to wait. I would recommend that you have conversations with your HR directors and with your boards about this. Our board know all about Towards Excellence. They know about talent management. They can see the impact that it has on the team and on the organisation, and they hold finance in higher esteem as a result of it. So I would encourage everybody to be having those conversations around the board table and then with their HR directors, because we're not trying to do anything out with anywhere else, but we don't want to hang back and wait because our staff told us that this is what they wanted us to do.
Can I add something too? So I think no matter what role you do in the NHS, you want to be valued and recognised for it. You want to work in a place that develops you, whatever that development looks like to you, and you want to be included and feel that you belong in that organisation. So I think that transcends whatever role you do and whatever organisation you work in. So I think kind of my heart did a little leap as you were talking about the talent strategy, because actually having a conversation with somebody ticks all of those areas. The fact that somebody wants to understand how I want to progress, they also want to recognise what I'm currently doing, and they want to make sure that I'm included in whatever is happening. So I think there's a real alignment to kind of what we all want that helps our well-being, because that's what keeps us well at work, all of those things. In our organisation, we've had talent conversations as part of our appraisals, going back to 2017, but it absolutely mirrors to some of the stuff that you're talking about. And actually we come together as a group of execs every year to look at those individuals that are rated in our kind of top talent category, those that want to progress, and we think about how do we develop them together. So I'd say this, although we do it in a slightly different way to what's been described, there's still a synergy and alignment. I would encourage you to talk to your CPOs to really understand what's already happening, if you don't know that, and also how you can make sure that this happens alongside that in your organisation.
Donna, can just pick up on something you were alluding to there. One of the things that I think that we struggle with is the line manager conversation. We teach people all sorts of technical stuff in the finance function. We don't teach them how to have an effective line manager conversation. Some people would just say that that's just common sense, but others, it's not common sense too. I think Andrea referred to hard-nosed accountants earlier, and hard-nosed accountants on occasion haven't got the best people skills, it would be seen. So how do you go about in UHCW trying to promote or educate the line manager conversation?
So we've done a few things. We've kind of rolling back all the way to 2014 now, we've had a leadership programme in place, which covers the management aspect. And again, we bring people together cross-professionally at all different levels in the organisation to support them in understanding who they are as a leader, what it's like to be on the receiving end of you as a leader, all the way through to some of those kind of what I would say are crucial skills actually in how to have a good conversation, no matter what that conversation's about. And through that programme, we've supported nearly 2,000 leaders across our organisation over that period of time. And that's everybody from our chief officer team all the way through to an admin team leader in our organisation, coming together on multi-professional cohorts. The other piece that we've launched more recently is a dedicated step into management programme, because we know sometimes as an NHS, I would say, we're not that great at supporting people before they take on those roles. We almost go, here you go, sink or swim. And then we go, oh, they're not very good at that, are they? They were a brilliant X, but they're not a very good manager. Well, actually, why would we do that to people? And so we should be supporting them before they take on those roles. So we've been having a programme called Step Into Management, says what it does on the tin, that again brings people together on that kind of more basic stuff. How do you have a conversation? How do you overcome that challenge when you step up into a management role in a team that you used to work in? So how do you make that progression from being mate to manager in that sense? How do you have some of those good coaching conversations? What are some of the skills you need? But also linked to our improvement system, because we've been partnering with VM since 2015 now. We really focus on the fact that as a leader, as a manager, you don't have all the answers. So it's about how do you recognise that those people that are doing the work, whatever that work is, will know it best, and how do you put some framework around them, give them the time, the permission to try stuff, to test stuff, to make a change to something as well.
Okay, thank you. Mike, welcome to the stage, to a bunch of NHS accountants. Could you share some examples, if you like, of the challenges that you face in your industry with regards to recruitment, retention, and what is it that you're doing that maybe we can steal from?
Yeah, thank you. So firstly, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm a big believer in the NHS and in public healthcare generally. I'm married to a nurse, a cancer nurse at the John Radcliffe Hospital. It's quite interesting. I looked at the agenda and we're followed by Yolina from Kingston, and my oldest daughter was born at Kingston. So it's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I think, when we look at challenges of recruitment, let's be honest, we have only a fraction of the challenges that you guys have. There's a lot to be said for the brand above the door, and we benefit from that, and you should benefit from that as well, because people want to come and work for the NHS. And there's a couple of experiences, I think, some at Coca-Cola, but also I'm the governor of my local school, which has informed some of the thinking on this. I think, for a commercial organisation, we have quite low turnover. The average person in our organisation has been there over 11 and a half years, which is, quite a long time for a commercial organisation. But ultimately, it's a war for talent, and you need to give people a reason and a culture. There's a saying at Coke that people join for the brands and they stay for the people, and people stay a long time. And once you've got people in, people don't really want the hassle of moving. So how do you make it a great place to work? Ultimately, most people don't want to move organisations, because we all know that when you get your CV ready and you've gone out, you've emotionally left by the time you've gone out to the market. So I think it's a combination. It's a combination of pay and benefits, which I know you guys have very little control over because it's centrally set. But that almost is a negative. If those are bad, people go. But they kind of have to be in negative territory for people to go. Most people, when all is said and done, there are a few exceptions, but most people are not massively motivated by the pay and benefits alone. They will become motivated by them if they're too bad. But then it's about future development and progression, and never underestimate, is it a nice place to work? Ultimately, if it's a nice place to work, you're surrounded by people that you like, you're doing a job that you find interesting, and you've got future development, most people will put up with a load of the other crap that gets in the way.
But that's changed, hasn't it, in recent years with the advent of more home and flexible working. How are you tackling that?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. So I think it's quite interesting. So one of the things I think, you've got to make it easy for people to come to work, or you've got to make it easy for people to work for you. And so how do you do that? How do you offer that flexibility? Equally, I think there are challenges if I look at the young people in our organisation, the experience that we got by being in the office and picking stuff up and overhearing conversations and going and seeing somebody is very difficult to replicate. And you don't, so I think there are great advantages to coming into the office, albeit, we don't do it 5 days a week, but generally sort of 3 days a week, I'll be somewhere.
And I think that's something that I suspect most finance departments are wrestling with, is the balance between the in-office and the out-of-office offer. How's that go?
And it's also a perception thing, isn't it? Because when you've got, and we see this at the school, that, when teachers have got to come in, or doctors and nurses have got to come in, and porters and all the rest of it, then actually, if the finance function are not in, then that has a perception, which you have to
It does.
balance.
Donna, how are you finding out your HCW? You had a wry smile on your face through it.
I do, because I suppose I find it interesting that when we talk about flexibility, we instantly go to talking about working at home. That's one type of flexibility, but actually, just like we're all not the same in this room, there's no one size fits all for everybody. Some people, in terms of their flexibility, want to absolutely be in or on site at work. I'll say that, because you're working wherever you're working, but actually they want to be on site at work because of some of those things about actually we're all social creatures and we want that interaction with people. Some people, that would be absolutely their worst nightmare, and they want to be completely remote all of the time. Some people simply want to do a compressed working week in the way that our clinical teams often do, particularly our nursing teams. So we have a whole hybrid of approaches. In fact, in September this year, we're starting a new approach to offer everybody in our corporate teams and any non-clinical staff in clinical groups the opportunity to move to a 4-day compressed working week and a 9-day or a 9-day fortnight, based on some of the research from the Global 4-Day Week trial, actually, in terms of the impact that has for individuals' well-being, it has for their kind of engagement levels, but also linked to some of the benefits we know it potentially will have for productivity in the organisation, but also linked all the way through to things like our green plan and reducing journeys. So we're doing it as a bit of a research piece, a bit of evaluation, whilst also in our clinical areas, looking at things like team-based rostering, so self-rostering, which again, we know from research with time-wise has an impact on your ability to retain people, to engage them, to keep them motivated. So I think we just have to be careful that we don't think one size fits all, because I would say it absolutely doesn't.
I would agree entirely. Just a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. A question for Andrea. Is it intended that talent management conversations form part of the appraisal process, and that the outcomes of those conversations are formally built into appraisal documentation, or is this for organisational discretion?
So I think the latter, really. We weren't seeing it as an absolute integral part of an appraisal where you're focusing on your objectives, your performance. This was more about the individual, that conversation I think Rob was asking about earlier. So if organisations felt it was better to put it into the appraisal, there's no antibodies to that, but it was felt that we need to be careful that it is something on top of appraisal, and therefore having a separate conversation. We're here to talk about you and your aspirations. We're not here to talk about how you're performing in your job and your objectives and how you're doing against your objectives. We're here to talk about you and where you're at and what your thoughts are. So it kind of designed to be separate, but if it was felt that it would work better, there is no rule book.
Yeah, and I know from personal experience, a lot of those appraisal conversations split into two, don't they? A rear view, half an hour talking about how you've done, and then a forward-looking, where do you want to be in terms of development, etc., etc.
I think the additionality is the management teams, the leadership teams having conversations then about their staff as well, without feeling awkward about that. So there's the conversations with the individual, and then there's the conversations as a team about your staff and about your pipeline, and that taking place across your entire system. So not just your organisation, that happening in your ICS, and that happening in your regional teams as well. So it's a combination of that individual conversation and then that step back and looking, that those well-led arrangements.
Okay. Donna, you might be best placed to pick this one up. This is an interesting one from someone. I do want to progress and excel in my career, but my line manager, current and past, do not have the courage or enthusiasm to help me at all. How do I take this forward?
Well, that's a great question. Go and talk to somebody in your OD function or the equivalent of. Find out what's on offer that you can get involved in. That might not be in your professional field, that might be wider. Talk to your manager's manager about what you want to do. Talk to other colleagues in your team about how they've been supported to develop, is what I'd say.
Yeah.
I suppose it's quite tricky to answer that without knowing exactly what they mean in terms of their development. Because the other bit I'd say is that we often think about development as only being kind of an upwards trajectory, and actually development can mean kind of moving around, moving sideways, getting another set of skills or experience to add to your toolkit, rather than just constantly thinking about it as an upwards trajectory.
I think sometimes for finance staff who are in that sort of situation, going and speaking to professionals outside of finance may take a degree of courage itself.
Yeah.
I think there is something about being able to go ultimately to the CFO and say, I've got a bit of an issue here. So I think there is something for CFOs to make sure that they're seen as being accessible and supportive of the whole development journey for all staff. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, but I think as Andrea said, actually that piece about if you're bringing together the outcomes from your talent conversations, whatever format they take or are taking at the moment, and actually looking at that, then that gives the chance for not just the individual's line manager to be aware of that, and actually involves other folks in that piece. So maybe does it in a slightly different way.
Okay.
I don't think people should be worried about going to talking to somebody from the HR profession.
No, not at all. Mike, what lessons do you think that the NHS can learn from other industries with regard to sort of talent management and recruitment?
I think, in terms of talent management, I think it's got to be top and centre of what happens. Throughout the organisation, it's quite structured. It's quite simple, but it's quite structured, and it always happens. So no matter how busy it is, no matter what deals are going on, no matter what the state of the business, whether it's 2 times or 4 times a year, generally as a finance leadership team, we come together generally in person and spend half a day discussing people twice a year. And we'll do the next 2 levels down, and obviously we need to prioritise the people, but that puts in place a mechanism whereby all of the sub-teams then do exactly the same thing. And I can't really stress this enough, no exceptions, no excuses, it always happens. And so therefore we've always got a talent pipeline of, if someone leaves, who's the caretaker for that role, who are the people that are ready now, ready in 1 to 2 years, ready in 3 to 4 years. Actually, if we look at our top talent, how are we developing those? Where are the gaps? Do we need to put them through a programme? I think, often it can feel a bit repetitive because you're discussing the same people, but it always happens, and therefore it does just become part of DNA, that it's really, really important.
And do the rest of the team know it's happening?
Yes. Yeah, because, well, it's like a pyramid that it goes down. So in order to be able to discuss it at level 1, you need to have the discussion at level 2. So the individual country finance leadership teams will have that discussion, and therefore their managers will have that discussion with them.
Okay, so it's become embedded
Yeah.
throughout the
Yeah.
structure of the team.
And I think there's a bit of more modelling leadership, whatever you like to call it, there as well, that, you know, if the leaders ask the right question, it becomes apparent when someone's blagging it, or that they haven't done the work or had the discussions. And also, how do you measure the competence of your leadership? The competence of your leadership is not just can they do the job and they do it technically, it's how they're developing their people. So if you've got a leader who, frankly, you know, their team is like a black hole, people go in and they never come out again, then that needs to be seen as something that maybe this leader has to develop. So it being seen conversely, really positively, that actually people come to that team and then leave that team and go on to greater things, is really good.
We don't need people going into a black hole. Okay. Go on.
That's the model. That's the model that we put into the documentation to support that conversation, and that's what I was talking about. That really links very, very strongly to well-led. So, and that embedding, that's where we really want to get to. It just becomes expected. That's what we do, and people being good at being leaders is really important as delivering whatever objectives that might have been set.
Okay, so just picking up on that, Andrea, for a moment, one of the questions that's been asked is, how will we link this whole talent management strategy, and how will we engage the chief executive officers such that this starts to appear more formally in the objectives of the chief finance officers?
So this is something that I do automatically at the moment. It's become normal to have a conversation during my appraisal and outside of appraisal as well, is here's some really good ideas about developing staff, things that staff, or welfare and well-being of staff, anything that comes out of One NHS Finance.
But let's just say I'm a finance director who doesn't care about One NHS Finance.
Yeah.
I've got to where I've got, and the team, they exist, and I'm not that bothered. How are you going to get me to say, actually, this is really important stuff?
Okay, so I think there's two forms of attack, shall we have? Regional finance directors. So you should be doing what we've just been discussing here and looking at your finance directors on your patch. Are they good leaders? Are they doing what they need to do? Are you satisfied that everybody that works in your finance function is getting what they really need, what they deserve, and therefore getting us the best outcomes? And then talking before about boards, so the Leadership Academy, a model around grow, stretch, is coming our way fairly soon. So I think a two-pronged approach there really. CEOs and regional FDs have got a part to play.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think that whether it's the regions or the ICBs, there are questions being asked of CFOs to make sure that they are participating and making sure that they are delivering for their teams. So I think there is something in there.
I think there's always an element of sort of carrot and stick with these things, but it sounds like you've got engagement surveys and stuff like that in the background, and those are quite a big deal where we are. You know, we do one every year or so, and you know the results of that and how your team perform or how your team rank you. We struggled a bit in the past because there's kind of been generic leadership questions and it's been a bit unclear. Do you talk about the group leadership or are you talking about your manager? So we tried to separate those out in more recent times because otherwise you don't quite know what question they're answering. But you know, if people are asked those questions and those results get taken seriously by the level above, then sooner or later people do take it seriously for their teams.
Okay. Donna, in an ideal world, what role does technology play in addressing workforce challenges?
I think technology has a great big part to play in addressing some of the challenges that we've got. And I say it's about thinking about how we can use tech in only the space where a human, so we can release people to do only things that a human can do. So actually we can automate a lot of stuff, can't we, in our processes. I'd just give a note of caution that we just got to be careful that we don't automate stuff that's a wasteful process. Do we really need to be doing that thing? Are we doing it in the slickest way? Otherwise, we're just building that waste into the automation, which is kind of great on one hand, but not on another. And I think there's also something around how we can use technology in terms of getting out and engaging more folks and understanding more folks, using, including more folks. And there's a whole kind of set of ranges and ways in which we can do that. And I suppose there's lots of examples across NHS organisations of where they've done this well, whether it's robotic process automation on processes or whether it's actually using AI to replace kind of reviewing diagnostics and reporting, for example, because we know we've got challenges in that workforce space. So I suppose it has a really big role to play. Just a note of caution that you really understand what problem you're trying to address first before you think about technology. Otherwise, you can digitise or automate something that actually doesn't need to exist in the first place.
Agreed. Okay. Andrea, we talk about attracting new talent. What is being done to widen advertising further than just the NHS website?
So this is something we do talk about in the National Finance Academy. To support all of this work, there are a number of different work streams being established. One's looking at, it's the ED&I agenda, and there's going to be an EDI session on later today. There's another looking at how we support secondments in a more formal way. And then another big piece of work is around that attraction, going into schools. There's a pilot in London going into deprived areas and schools and looking at attraction in that way. Looking at how we write our job descriptions, what experience and skills we really need. I think I looked at a job description for a Band 5 management accountant and I wouldn't have got shortlisted. So there is a whole lot of work taking place around this to support that, of which that attraction is important through an ED&I lens, through a protected characteristics lens, looking at areas of deprivation and really thinking about that inclusivity in how we bring people into the organisation. I know when I was looking for online for a family member who was just graduating and looked at the big firms and looked at how they try to attract, bright young things into their organisations. They've got ED&I all the way through them. They're exciting, they're inclusive, there's a bit of a wow, and I think we've got NHS jobs. So we've got an awful lot of work to do in that arena, but individual organisations can do an awful lot more as well, and really think about how, when they are doing the recruiting, what they put in their adverts, what they're really asking for from an experience and qualifications point of view, how we're going about in an interview assessing somebody, is that really fair, the way that we're doing that. So it's just, this is a huge area, not just for the finance function, I don't think, but it is something we recognise, and it is being picked up.
Okay, I mean, we'll leave the EDI agenda alone.
Yeah.
We'll pick that up in the next session. But there is absolutely something, isn't there, about, particularly with remote and rural economies, about selling the place, not just the job. So the marketing has to be more than just a Band 5 management accountant wanted, please. Definitely. Donna?
Just going to say there's also something about, we're all, with the size of our organisations, anchor organisations in the systems that we're in. So I would also say to look local is really important, but to look local into some of those places. So whether it's deprived communities, whether it's those with learning disabilities, whether it's care leavers. Kind of just a stat that 76%, those with learning disabilities, only 23% of them are in paid employment compared to 76% of the working population. That's just not right. And we should be doing something about that. We can support people to gain good employment in the NHS because it is good employment. It is, I don't want to talk about pay, but it is well paid in comparison to some other places. But actually, it is a place that you can develop and you can have a career or lots of different careers over your lifetime. So actually, I'd be saying to look local, to work with partners in your system, to work with the other big employers in your system, to bring people in at the entry level that you can then develop and support and grow, as well as thinking about how you bring in graduate talent as well. But actually, that's really important to do.
I mean, quite clearly there's a message to recruit debtor clerks, because both Andrea and I started as debtor clerks back in the midst of time. A question from the audience. Hardev yesterday talked about new recruitment processes for NHS Finance and what the role of one NHS Finance and the Academy should be. Should this new framework help us to facilitate recruitment better internally and remove the need for agencies that tend to cost a lot of money? Question to any one of you. What more can we do to recruit and avoid using the private sector?
For finance or in general, because the two different questions in that for me, although some things may be the same. I think there is something about streamlining our recruitment processes. We write job descriptions to be matched for Agenda for Change. They're not actually what the role is. So there's something about, again, I would support you to work alongside HR colleagues to streamline those processes and to move away from really lengthy job descriptions that talk about kind of how much you're going to be standing during the day. I mean, who has that in a job description? If you look at any other organisation outside of the NHS, I find it really bizarre. And I wouldn't put that in a job description. But I also think there's something about standardisation of job descriptions as well, so that actually you've got clarity about what that role means. It might have a different title in different organisations, but to allow that movement around. And then I think there's something about constantly looking at how you improve your recruitment process. So that you're not relying on temporary workforce. So you're bringing people in quicker or as quickly as you can. But also, you've got to look at the retention piece because you can bring people in as quick as you possibly can. But if you're losing them as quick as you bring them in, actually, we all know that doesn't make any sense. So I think, and we've seen that with the workforce plan, haven't we, published last week, about an equal focus on recruitment and retention. And actually, I would say probably more of a focus on retention. Most people that are in our organisation are going to stay in our organisation or in our system or in the NHS. And actually, if we can focus on supporting those folks, then we can avoid some of the
and I think
stuff.
some of the comments that Mike made around Coke, and they come for the name, but they stay for the people. I think the NHS has got massive similarities with that. Just a further question. In the South East Regional Academy, apparently they're considering ways to widen their recruitment pool, and in particular reaching to schools in the more deprived areas. Have the panel got any thoughts or experience on what additional support might be needed for new recruits from underrepresented groups during the first 6 to 12 months? Andrea, do you want to start with that?
So I think it is really important that we get this right. I know that we've recognised in our organisation, it's not finance, but when we've had lots of international nurse recruitment, the difference that's made, and perhaps not everybody's having the experience that we would like them to have, and how do we do learning from that so people feel actually when they're coming into our workplace they feel not threatened in any way because they might feel different. So there's a lot of work that we're doing in our organisation around that inclusivity with our staff. There's also something about recognising the needs of young people as well, and I know we're setting up a staff group that is a young person staff group, and that's something we've never done before. So how we go about providing that support can be very, very different depending on where people have come from as well. So, you know, some of the challenges we've had with our local apprentices are around travel, basic things like travel, breakfast. So there are lots of kind of the welfare, well-being things that we really need to think about when we're dealing with people coming in from different backgrounds, different ages, different cultures, languages. That's very, very different to the way we do things currently, where we have an induction. You come in, you have an induction for a day, 2 days, 3 days, and then you're in and you're kind of left to it. So something like more of a wraparound, more regular contact for apprentices, people coming in from abroad who have been thrown into the Warrington culture and don't really quite understand what the Warrington culture is. We just had a board conversation this week about cultural appreciation and how do we as an organisation really have that appreciation of different cultures to really truly make people feel when they walk in from any background that they belong. And I think that's not something that we're going to achieve overnight, but it applies to all age groups, but particularly to our younger people from backgrounds where getting up, getting into work, having some food isn't the norm. That is just something very, very different. And I'm really pleased to see that we're starting to do things to recognise that and support people come into work, learn, and then secure permanent roles.
Okay, Mike, from a private sector perspective, what do you
I think, you know, there's inclusion and diversity, or whatever, however it's branded, but is absolutely central, I think, to recruitment and to retention. And I think it goes in that order. If you make people feel included, then you will get the diversity that you want. So it's got to be, if you focus too much on diversity without the inclusion, you'll just get people leaving. I think it's really important to bring a wider demographic in, whether that's ethnic background, whether it's religious, national, whether it's social demographic. That's really important. I think there's a few things that people need. People need role models when they come in. And if you come in from a minority group and you're surrounded and everybody you meet is not from the same group, and actually if you look at the sort of top level of the organisation, then everybody is not from your group, then it's very difficult to feel, to see your path through it. So having role models, and they don't need to be exactly in your area, but having role models that are senior and that then take that role seriously to be role models is really important. What about mentors when you come in? How do you buddy people up? How do you make people feel that, you know, I'm here with a number of other people that are like me? And that's, you know, through a whole range of different things, that's what people want to feel when they come to work. So I think the more you can do that, you know, there's little things as well. So at the school that I'm involved with, we have a few flats that are just sort of historical. It's in Oxfordshire. The cost of living is high in Oxfordshire compared to the salaries. You don't get London waiting or anything. And actually, you know, the number of people that come and join as junior teachers after they finish their teacher training, and they stay in the flat to get themselves set up for a year or a year and a half, and then actually they're sort of there for 20 years or 30 years. You know, it's not a big investment, but things like, you know, most nurses and whatever used to stay in, you know, when I first met my wife, she was in nursing accommodation in Clapham. So, you know, things that you do to get people in. But I think, you know, role models, mentoring, you need to make people feel like they're
at home as quick as possible. Okay, a question from the audience. Somebody had their hand up just down there.
Thank you. I don't know how Slido works.
That's fine, it's fine.
I'm not sure I've got a fully formed question, but some of the stuff that struck me over the course of the last 24 hours is around, so I wonder if there's something One NHS Finance can do to support on some agendas outside of finance. So the internationally educated nursing issue is one for us. By the end of this year, 55% of our nursing workforce will be internationally educated. That does not go down well in Shropshire, which is actually to the detriment of Shropshire. But for me as the finance director, if those people don't stay, if they don't have a great experience, it actually causes me massive financial problems. So then, is there something that One NHS Finance can do if we're grappling with that similar issue? And then I'm thinking around other areas around recruitment and retention. So I have my finance workforce, but then I have things like my estates workforce, which again just causes me to hemorrhage a load of money on contractors if we don't get that right in estates as well. So I know not really the topic of today's talk, but I think there's probably some themes that are coming through where we can expand some of the work that we're doing that would be helpful to the bottom line, essentially. Thank you.
Andrea, quick question there about the transferability, the applicability of what we're doing in finance.
I think we're talking about people, so I think it's all transferable. That will be my response, that you can apply everything we've been talking about today to any of the workforce. It's how you engage in your organisation with the people that have responsibility, like the nurse director, for example, about how you share what you know, what you've learned, tools, how you do that, your relationships in your organisation. But I just think all of this isn't about people that are good at finance. This is about people. So that should apply to your estates team as well. I
think a lot of the finance directors in the room will have portfolios that've got estates, information, procurement in there. And I can't imagine for 1 minute any one of them sitting there going, well, I'll do this for the finance team, but forget the rest of them. Everything that's been said, I think, is equally transferable. So that, I'd like to think, does cascade wider than just the finance team. And if we can show the way, and through One NHS Finance, I think that has to be a good thing, doesn't it?
I think there's a bit about we talk in the organisation about being the frontline focus. And, you know, there's a saying in the Coke system, you either sell Coke or you help to sell Coke. But, you know, I think often people come in either from the outside or the people internally and they say, what will the CEO think about this? And I usually roll my eyes. But, you know, who's the most important person in the organisation? If we've done our job right, the CEO or the group CFO or me, you know, you can take us out of the organisation, and frankly, if we've done our job, nothing will happen for several weeks. If you take the person on dispatch and take him away, there will be a queue of lorries outside the factory in about 10 minutes. So my conclusion of who's the most important person in our organisation, and it's the same. So making people feel important, like you might be a world-leading heart surgeon, but if the operating theatre hasn't been cleaned or the porter hasn't got the patient down there, you know, the whole thing breaks down.
Just pick up on that bit. I'd say go and ask people what they need, and you're doing that through this conversation in terms of the talent conversation, but do the same with all your different groups. So in terms of internationally educated nurses, by the end of this year, about a third of our workforce will be internationally educated. And actually they're staying with us. They've got about 99% retention rate, and that's helped drive our vacancy picture down to where it is, and obviously has had a knock-on impact in terms of our bank and agency use. Still more to do, but actually going in the right direction. But we've established what's called a shared decision-making council in the organisation that brings all of our internationally educated staff together, and it's simply a place for them to talk about what they need, and then to link in with them to make some of those things happen. Some of those things are really simple, as you've talked about. That's about supporting them when they first come to work in the organisation. Some of that is more challenging, and we're still working on some of those things. But the principle of asking people what they need, going and listening and not thinking that you've got the answers, but you can support people to make those things happen, is a principle that transcends whoever you're talking to. So just go see, ask why, and show respect to those people.
Okay. Cathy.
Thank you. Cathy Kennedy, work in NHS England. I think one of the things that people find quite challenging as line managers going into these conversations about kind of expectation management and also alignment of the view of the individual and their ability and readiness to move up with perhaps the view of the organisation or the manager involved. Those difficult conversations can be very demotivating if not handled well. I just wondered what experience you've had in your organisations about talent management, how you make sure that all talent management conversations feel like a positive conversation, even if the outcome of that talent management conversation might be, I don't believe you're ready yet, I recognise you do, but actually I think these are the gaps. How do you turn that into a positive and not into a negative?
With a bit of prep work. So when we first introduced the talent conversations that we've got, people found that really hard. Their first reaction was, what do you mean I've got to talk to somebody about where they kind of rate themselves, and then I've got to talk to them about that, and then I've got to report that somewhere, or I can't do that. Then we had people giving people ratings that, as the system that we had at the time, we had like a gold rating level, which was that you were achieving what you needed to, you were demonstrating the values of the organisation in the way that you went about the work, so not just what you were doing, but the way you were doing it, and that you wanted to progress. And we had people ranking all of their team in that top category because they found it really uncomfortable not to do that. And then we had people making up their own ratings that were somewhere in between the ratings, because that also made them feel more comfortable, and it meant they didn't have to have the conversation. So we then did an awful lot of work to coach, to guide managers in some of those conversations, but also to really make clear to people entering those conversations what the conversation was about. And I would probably say that you shouldn't enter a conversation, it shouldn't be a surprise in that conversation. It should be the only time you're talking to somebody. And you should be doing that on a regular basis and spotting things on a regular basis. And if somebody isn't delivering what you need them to, or you don't think they're quite ready, you don't have to wait for that formal conversation to talk about it. So it's getting people comfortable with that. So I think there's work to do with managers having those conversations, and also work to do with people entering those conversations about what they're about. So kind of having some of the easy access toolkits that you've described will help with some of that. But I think it's keeping talking as well.
Yeah, I think I'd like to sit here and say, oh, you know, in a private organisation it's all perfect, but it's not. You know, we've all inherited teams where you just hang your head that obviously no development conversations and no serious feedback has happened. I think there's a few things that I'd just like to mention. One is there are differences. There's quite a body of evidence that males and females are quite different when putting themselves forward, that the percentage of the job that they think they can do is, you know, the average male, if they're 30% ready, they'll put their hand up and say, yeah, I'll do that. And the average female needs to be 80%. I don't know what the percentages are, but there's quite a lot of evidence that that's the case. So therefore, actually, you do need to push your female talent to put themselves out there a bit more than you do your male talent. I think it's quite interesting on finance. I've been doing finance appraisals for years, obviously. And it's quite funny. You have 6 positive points of feedback and 2 negative points of feedback. And they've got their pen ready. They don't write any of the positives down. The 2 negatives, development points, are written down with notes and underlining. And so then they take that piece of paper away, and their recollection of the conversation is the 2 negative things you've said. And I think that's, whereas if you go and do the same in the sales organisation, they'll only write the 5 positive things down. So I think you can balance it around competencies and skills. You know, to get to the next level, there are these 5 things you need to do. These 3 you're actually really good at, but we need to see more in these, which takes some of the, well, you're not just good enough, out of it, and it makes it a bit more structured and a bit more.
Yeah, I think the point that Donna makes is really vital in that it shouldn't be a surprise. But as Mike says, because of time and maybe previous line management practice and all the rest of it, it often is a surprise. And it's that first conversation that requires a degree of tact and thought and subtlety that maybe just needs a little bit of thought beforehand, doesn't it? An interesting question, I made a quip earlier about being a debtor's clerk, and it's generated a question. Building on the debtor's clerk question, as we automate the more basic fundamentals of finance, how do we build... there's 2 questions about debtors clerks. Let's go with the first one first. A lot of careers start in posts like debtors clerks, then progress to more senior posts. How do you think outsourcing of transactional services will help this?
Should I give this one a go since we've got a big... So we for the last 10 years we've got a shared service centre. So if you look at our European workforce, you know, over half of the finance function is in Bulgaria in our shared service organisation, and all of the transactional areas plus a whole load of reporting capability and our robotics team and a whole bunch of other stuff is in that organisation. And it does give a problem, and I think most big organisations in the private sector have some similar construct, and none of them have really cracked it yet, I think is the first thing I'd say. But it does give, because the experience that I got when I was going through, that you could get given other pieces to broaden your experience, doesn't exist as much or isn't as easy to do. So you do need to be much more, not prescriptive, but you do need to make it happen. So you need to give people placements, I think. You need to encourage job swaps, and we're not particularly good at this at the moment, but I think, it is a big problem, I think, of how people start. And we've got a graduate program, and people start, and people do rotations between those areas. But it's, it is a problem if you've only got the higher ones.
I think so.
Retained.
Donna?
I'm just going to say, you've got to think differently. So if we all think back to our first roles, and sometimes they were quite
mundane,
boring and monotonous, I was going to say. Actually, do we take much joy from those? So is the fact that we've automated some of that, does that give people more joy in the roles that they are doing, and thinking differently about how do we develop? So, was your progression really based on the fact that you'd spent X amount of time doing that kind of routine, high volume, administrative tasks? Or was there more value that you could have added in that, however you describe that value? So I think thinking differently. So, and seeing it as an opportunity rather than a challenge in that space.
Okay. One final question, and then we will break, and this is to all of you. What advice would you give to people in the room to help their organisations remain agile and adaptable in the face of rapidly changing workforce? Donna, do you want to start?
I'll go first. I'll go back to that piece that I said earlier. Go see, ask why, and show respect. Understand people's worlds, and that will help them to feel valued, to feel recognised, to feel supported, and to feel developed. And actually, those remain the fundamental things that everybody needs, no matter what area you work in. And keep celebrating success. keep visible, and be engaged, be interested in what's going on for people. That will help you to retain people, and doesn't matter. We've got some significant challenges right now in the NHS, but I would say that's always been a challenge for us.
Mike?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, be interested, curiosity. Whenever anyone asks me what would you hire on, curiosity always wins today. I think development, be flexible, development opportunities. One of my previous roles was CFO for GB for Coke, and I spent 3 days in a factory going around doing time on each of the shifts, and what I learned was just so you don't want your finance teams to be in the office, you want them to go out and really experience how a hospital, what is the DNA of a hospital, and how does it work, and also how can you help each other. We have an example. Somebody that worked for me many years ago was going off travelling around Southeast Asia and Australasia, and was going to New Zealand. I contacted the New Zealand CFO. All I did was make the connection. He then went and spent 6 months working there, came back, still wanted to work in the Coke system, and he's still there now. So, often it's the minimal and the small things and just using that network that can have big rewards.
Okay, and the last word to Andrea.
So I think you can't beat walking around and talking to your staff and being visible and setting that culture that people can approach you and speak to you and come up with ideas, tell you the problems, come up with solutions, being inquisitive, curious, completely agree with that, and really develop a can-do, heads-up attitude. I think that can make a huge difference. And when I first started in Warrington, we asked the staff, what gets in your way? What would you change? You could change 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things. What would they be? I say about 90% of those things were in the gift of the individual to change. They just didn't think that they were able to do that, and it was just changing that mindset to just go about your day and fix whatever you can fix, improve whatever you can improve. And if you can't, then let's have a conversation about it. So I think we try to encourage moving from being really good at telling the score, telling the organisation how big the problem was and was going to being part of the solutioning in the organisation by being involved, coming up with ideas. So I think creating that kind of heads-up mindset has been really important and has led to things like, let's try agile working. Before the pandemic, we were just trying new things out, different kind of ways of working that Donna was talking about before. We said, we'll help with the car parking. That's a really big problem here. It doesn't feel great when you come for an interview and you can't even park your car, does it? Those basic things. So I think just creating that closer relationship with the team, and if you've got hundreds and thousands of staff, that can be quite difficult, but finding a way to have that contact with your teams is really important, and giving them that empowerment to make changes themselves.
Okay, thank you. And here I was thinking we would get through 90 minutes without mentioning car parking. Okay, thank you all for that, and will you all join me in thanking the panel? Okay, so now we have a break for just under half an hour, and we'll be back in this room at 11:15, where we will consider in a little bit more detail the EDI agenda. Thank you.